Welcome back to Alternative Eye Beyond the File, the show where we go beyond the headlines, beyond the reports, and into the real stories of the people doing the work that often goes unseen. I'm your host, Melissa Phelan, and today's guest is someone whose career has been built on action, leadership, and protecting the most vulnerable among us. Joining me is Katie Yarvan, a seasoned director of operations with more than 2 decades of experience, spanning law enforcement, investigations, transportation logistics, and child exploitation prevention. Katie currently serves with the Protecting Children's Innocence Task Force, where she helps lead a multi-agency mission focused on combating child exploitation and human trafficking across the country. Her goal goes far beyond logistics. She oversees national partnerships, coordinates critical resources, manages budgets, and supports the technology, training, and personnel needs that help investigators do their job effectively. She's also been instrumental in developing wellness and resilience programs for professionals working some of the most difficult child crime cases imaginable. Before that, Katie served as Florida Director of Operations for Operation Lightshine, where she supported Intercept Task Force partnerships and helped deliver training and resources to law enforcement and communities on trafficking and exploitation investigations. Katie brings a rare blend of operational excellence and frontline understanding. Today, we're talking about the realities behind these investigations, the importance of supporting those who do this work, and what it truly takes to build systems that protect children and pursue justice. Katie Yarvan, welcome to Alternative Eye Beyond the File.
I'm working very hard to get the right people in the seat, and it's an honor to be able to speak with people like you.
It's amazing when we find that. I mean, just recently, I worked for the Marks before they started running for governor, and that's one of the great things. I had an option to take a job back at another police department. Victor said, no, your talents would be wasted there. And he's right. When I look at it, I can reach more people doing what I'm doing now than I ever could going back into that position, no matter if I was cold cases that I was working, because they gave me my pick of any department I wanted to be in. I can definitely help not only victims and people like yourself and the general public and help capture suspects doing what I'm doing with a national reach. And actually, some of our technology has gone worldwide. So it's just amazing.
Wow. I think it is amazing that the right people can show you who you are, right? And say, look, you're needed in a larger area, a bigger net that you can cast. And I would love to talk to you about that. So where did this start? Initially, what drew you to who you became today?
So much like you, from an early age, I was always drawn to investigation. I toyed with going to law enforcement, becoming FBI. I talked to some people. I'm a little bit older. I talked to some people, 20 plus years ago when I was looking at going into those fields, particularly at FBI. And the one guy told me, if you go into FBI 1, you go through Quantico, no problem. I was young. I could handle that. But you have no say where you live. So I wasn't really keen on that. And then my biggest thing was, I like to know what happened. Who, what, where, when, and why. And if you were in that position, you wouldn't know. You could be told to follow somebody for 6 months and never hear why and be told to stop. And I want to know, like I said, the who, what, where, and why. Why did it happen? What happened to them? What happened to the people that I was involved in? So that eventually led to, once I got old enough into my career, into a local sheriff's office where we talked about like my background. I've done 20 plus years in investigations, whether it be through a law enforcement type stuff. I've done crime scene investigation. I help run a gang graffiti unit. Same thing. I didn't want that job. I didn't want to have to learn that stuff. And I became very, very detailed and very extraordinary in that field. I had lots of suspects, things that I didn't think. I like that constant challenge. Nobody else wants that role where you go and achieve it, make it something greater. I had like 50 something suspects. I turned around a whole bunch of different local agencies who had just kind of given up. They didn't know what to do. We changed state laws there in Nevada to make sure that there were stiffer penalties. So we did a lot of change just because I didn't think I could, and it turned out I could, and I was really good at what I did. And the same with crime scene and dealing with different things. So I've done, like I said, more than 20 years in law enforcement, whether it be at a sheriff's office, whether it be I actually worked for a public defender at one point. So as they say in law enforcement, you went to the dark side. But I think all those things help make me more well-rounded. Like I could see both ends. I see when we're putting them away, and I see what they're doing to try to get them off their charges, if that makes sense. And then into the private world of private investigation, same thing, where I got to see like the appeals side, A lot of people don't understand, like, once they're convicted and they go to prison, they still have quite a few appeals that they go through before they're out and they're, like, stuck in the prison doing their time or being put to death for their crimes. So I've done a lot of time talking with criminals behind bars. I've actually, before I even became invested in the child crimes, child exploitation, and human trafficking, one of the things that we did for the private investigation is we went to a conference there in California. There was a whole bunch of defense attorneys going over the different ways that they try to get their clients off from these particular charges.
Wow.
So it was interesting hearing the things. So, that gave me a broad perspective of why I'm in there. I've always had this drive to make sure things are done right. I'm always was willing to do over time. You wanted to help that person. I've done a little bit of everything without this particular crime. So when I was investigating and helping out in law enforcement, I never did child crimes. We only had one investigator that did it. But my why and why I'm drawn into this, at an early age, I was a victim of exploitation by somebody I trusted. It's not something that we all talk about. Not necessarily reported to where it was put into those lovely stats. Drives me crazy when people report stats. So many kids are victims, so many men, so many women. But there's so many that aren't reported, Melissa, and that's even more staggering than those numbers. If people really step back and think about the people they know, the people who've told them their deepest, darkest secrets, that number is a lot greater.
Yes, it
That's
is.
why we're here. This is why I'm in this position, is to not just help the ones that have reported it, it's to help those ones who haven't. And that's one thing that I've seen over the couple of years because I've done obviously this type of work for a previous nonprofit. I've done that. I've done speaks at churches, gosh, wherever we spoke. Most every time we do, even just a fundraiser, even just a speaking and educating the church, letting them know that, this isn't something that happens outside their community. It is happening in their community. It might be happening next door, it could be happening across the street, could be happening in their home. All the people that come up to us afterwards that their chains are kind of broken, they tell us, Katie, can I talk to you? And they'll say, I never told anybody that I was a victim, but I'm glad to hear I'm not the only one. And that sometimes is just as fulfilling knowing that you helped that person take away that guilt because it wasn't theirs to carry. They didn't do anything wrong to have that happen to them. And for them to finally realize that they aren't alone and that they didn't do anything wrong and they could be freed. That's an amazing feeling. There's some that have confided in us that have never even told their spouse, Melissa, that they're victims of this particular crime, whether it be exploitation, whether it be a sexual abuse case. That's really my
It's so powerful that you yourself are a chain breaker, and then look at what you're able to inspire in other people. And it's necessary healing, right? Imagine, and you know this personally, carrying that your whole life, never being able to unburden or feel like you've been heard. That lives in your cells and your body.
absolutely. And that's one thing is you go into this, you're like, how can I have a greater impact? And definitely have a greater impact doing what I'm doing to make sure that no other child's harmed like we were, like Victor was, like some of the folks that we heard from this weekend. It's out there and it's making sure that it stops. We always talk about how we want to put the suspect away, but we also focus on trying to prevent them from even being victims. And especially with the technology and everything that's coming up with our kids, it's harder and it takes a little bit more one-on-one conversations, harder conversations, a little bit more prying than maybe you or I were raised with our parents because, the technology wasn't there. I'm that old to where the internet was coming out when I was graduating high school. So it wasn't a huge problem like it is now. So I definitely see that being a mother of 3 kids myself, one being a teenage girl, one being a young girl. I definitely
Right.
find that I'm a little bit more protective and not just over them, but over even my son. To give you an example, when, I still worked in law enforcement, my son's babysitter's son went to prison for allegations of child sexual abuse. And this is
Wow.
somebody who had watched my kid since they were 6 weeks old. And, as a parent, not knowing what's going on, if your child's been victimized, the one thing I always hit home on is as a parent, regardless of whether you're filled or not, is do not question your kids because the defense attorney will use that. If your child was abused by this person, you're questioning them, they're going to put some doubt into the jury's head because it's gonna look like you put those ideas in their heads. So the first thing I did was go to our particular detectives who handle this crime type and ask them, who were trained professionals, to interview my son just to make sure he wasn't. I didn't wanna put any ideas in there. I didn't wanna make any suggestions. I didn't wanna do anything that if he was a victim, it would screw up the prosecution and him doing time in prison. And from their investigation, trust them, take something off my heart, as a parent. The last thing you want to think is that your child's been victimized by somebody you trusted to watch them. And they
Yeah.
concluded in their interview that, he had not been sexually abused by this particular perpetrator, which was great for me, and I felt horrible for the other victims. But I know what I did was the right way, and it didn't cause any hiccups in that prosecution where he ended up actually doing prison time.
I mean, it's just a terrible situation, and when it hits so deep and close to you, and it's someone that you entrusted with your own child. I know that you're probably similar to me as a mother. I worry around the clock about my son. We go above and beyond to nurture our children in every way imaginable. And with caregivers getting access or people getting access within the home, that is the most common way that these predators are getting to our children. Is that correct?
Through the internet, through technology, I think that is upped it a little bit, but I still think we need to go back to the roots of this, Melissa. It's still happening, with trusted folks. When you're looking at the internet and these guys are looking at different ones and they're putting the pictures out there, that's starting with a hands-on victim. That means that's happening in somebody's home.
Yes.
The root that's always been there is still going on. They're just amplifying it by putting the images onto the internet and then sharing the sexual abuse material with other predators. But that's still having to have a hands-on victim. So that means there's still somebody gaining the trust of your child, whether it be, unfortunately, through a church, sometimes teachers, your babysitter, a neighbor, a family member. You still have to have, I would hate to say walls, but you do. You still have to kind of have those walls up. When my husband and I first got married, Melissa, we always agreed one thing. He grew up in a different era, but kind of morphed into like the same era I did. And it may had this experience growing up. You were always told to give so and so a hug.
Right.
We're told to tell auntie whoever goodbye, even if they weren't your aunt. So that's one thing with our youngest that we decided early on, that if our child felt uncomfortable, we were never going to make them give somebody a hug or kiss on the cheek if they didn't want to. And I think we were all trained as kids that that's what you did. And then you take it a step further with recent investigations that's been going on with some of our partner agencies. One of them was devastated because a particular person they were arresting plays their Santa Claus. And then a light bulb goes off in our head, and you're like, we take this time to make sure our kids aren't uncomfortable. We're not forcing them to hug or kiss somebody they don't want to. But how many times have you told your child to sit on Santa's lap so you can take that picture?
Right.
How many times have you seen a kid screaming and crying? How come we don't stop there? How come we
Yeah.
still force that? I think
Right.
parents need to step back, and if your child's uncomfortable, regardless of whether you want that picture or not for your Christmas card, that we stop forcing our kids to do things that are uncomfortable. Hug the Easter bunny, sit on Santa's lap. If they're uncomfortable, let's not force them to do that. Just like we
Yes,
wouldn't force them
Katie.
to give a hug or a kiss to somebody that they felt uncomfortable around.
Yes, Katie. And that image that you're talking about of the Easter Bunny Santa is a prime example. When you really think about what you're trying to achieve with that picture, look a little bit closer. I always tell people, look a little bit closer and pay attention to your body. Pay attention to what your spirit is telling you, your intuition about people, because you can feel it. And we
So
can't
true.
always feel it. We can't always anticipate everybody's moods. I think that's what's so dangerous about the current state of technology. You have increased access in all forms. And we know that these predators get together and they're in groupthink mentality. They're on the internet. I mean, how dangerous is it that they have access to each other now?
Well, and we go back to that old analogy. We wouldn't just, I mean, think about it. I came from the era where you played outside until the streetlights came on. That's how old I am.
Mhm.
I wouldn't even let my child in the front yard unless I'm there right now.
Right.
And the reality is that, the chances of them being kidnapped and the different things and the misconceptions that are out there are down low, but the chances of them being approached by somebody or somebody trying to gain their trust is still very real and there. Because that's how it starts. This isn't just a grab and snatch. They spend a lot of time earning our kids' trust. So neighbor, it could be, again, a teacher, it could be somebody at your church. They're taking their time to earn the trust. Imagine if they put that much effort into actually doing their jobs, Melissa. We'd have an amazing workforce here. Instead, they're doing this to make sure that they have the trust of a victim so they can continue doing the things. And that's what happened to me with the person who I trusted. They actually had a previous charge from a student saying that they were inappropriate with them, and that particular teacher turned us all against that particular student. until he had earned our trust. I mean, stalking, calling us at our homes, following us around, sending other kids Christmas gifts. And it wasn't until he tried, after I graduated and moved on to high school, where he tried to pick up on my sister, where I actually had to come forward because I didn't want her to have to go through what I went through. And he was actually trying to pick up on one of our other sisters because we were all a grade apart. And that's where we had to stand up and come forward and help stop this cycle. But looking back, and after everything was happening, you could see the different stages that he was doing to gain our trust. You guys can eat in here at lunch. You guys can do this, special privileges. And these are all the things you don't tell your parents any of that stuff.
Right.
You
Of
have to
course
start
not.
looking for those changes in your kids' behavior, especially when things start to go a little bit different, then there's the touching, then there's the inappropriate comments, and it changes. I don't care who you are. You might have seen it in your work, Melissa. People
Right.
change even the slightest, and it's being in tune with your child, not just saying they're moody teenagers. It's picking up on those slight changes. I'm not sure how old your son is. Like I said, I still have a relatively young kid. And when even she just shifts a little bit, we're like, "What happened?" Are you fighting with somebody at school? You're trying to find out what's made that slight change in their personality. And I think more people need to be in tuned with their own kids. And it's hard. We're in a generation where it takes two working parents. So we're not
Yes.
home or they're busy doing sports. So it's being involved and making sure you're around to see these changes.
Yes, and that quality time is something that we're all struggling with to have with our children. With the internet and with dating apps, Katie, this is why I became a tech founder. Right now I'm in the process of developing this technology that we're trying to rapidly deploy. It's a personal security system that is proactive, not reactive. We put people through training, especially younger generations of people. This is what modern dating looks like. This is the landscape. This is how you get out of the worst case scenario. We tailor that education to them. So when you start to really understand people's needs, you know how to educate them, right? And one of the things that I've learned as a mother, which I never knew about before, is that these guys it's their full-time job
Yep.
to find a single mother to get access to children. And I see this so much going on in these groups on Facebook. These women who are mothers just go out and meet whoever. And then within a couple days, the guy's in the home or the gal's in their home and they experience the worst types of trauma. I want to protect people from that. I think that people that have lived experience are some of the most powerful, like yourself, Katie, because we see just like when you were talking about earlier, this is something I wanted to bring back up. You're talking
Yeah.
about whenever you were working in law enforcement and you've seen so many different angles. You truly know the gaps. You know what we're up against and that's so beautiful to me because that is somebody that can really make a huge difference out here. And that's why I wanted to talk to you because I could sense a lot about you. I really could. I like that our first conversation is in this format, really, because it can be captured
Yeah.
and the essence of that message, I guess.
And it's true coming from law enforcement, a lot of people get I don't I don't wanna say they're confused, but I think just as civilians, general public who've never been in that system, whether they're civilian or commissioned, if you haven't been inside, whether it's a PD or federal or state, local agencies, you really don't know, and I hate to bring up politics, but it is. People think heard all the time, "I pay your salary, I'm a taxpayer." Law enforcement is funded, Melissa, with all this money, but they don't realize that there's so many different levels that people are funding, and, I go back to this crime type, and people often ask when we're out there speaking, why is it hard to get funding or why don't we hear about this? And this is the one thing that I always tell them, Melissa, this is the one crime type that you don't hear about until we already have a suspect and they're
Yes.
looking for more victims. Any other crime that's grown 1,000%, which this crime type has last couple of years, would be getting these citizens of the counties and the communities pounding on the sheriff or the police chief's door that something needs to change. If your murder rate went up by 1,000%, you think the community's just going to sleep? No. But they don't know this is happening until there's an arrest. They're not seeing the thousands and thousands and thousands of tips that these agencies are getting without any extra help, resources, or funding or training to help stop that and get to these kids. They're going up and the resources are going down.
So when you're seeing these kind of, and I hate to call it a trend, but we're talking about a significant increase here. What do you think is causing this ultimately? What's the root of this?
I think, just like anything, the perpetrators, suspects, the predators, whatever you want to call them, they're not necessarily getting smarter, but technology is coming out with different ways. There's a lot of different things that we might have used when we were younger that now these that were, like even looking at if you talk about back in the day when they used to share music. I know a lot of people have seen the map that Tim Tebow's put out there. That map is showing peer-to-peer networks. It's not
Mhm.
truly showing you all the child exploitation cases. And I want you to take that in, sink that in for a minute. That's just peer-to-peer. That's only a fraction of the actual cases that are out there. If people are upset and outraged by that technology on that map, but they don't realize that that's a very small fraction of what's really going on. That's just the peer-to-peer networks. It's just like when people used to share music back in the day. That's what that platform is showing. The IP address is sharing child exploitation material. It's not showing the stuff happening on Snapchat. It's not showing Facebook private chats. It's not showing where a lot of this and other apps of this technology, the black web, the dark web, where a lot of these conversations and items that are happening. It's not showing that.
It's not.
And every time one gets taken down, more come up. That's where technology, they're not just they're not necessarily getting smarter. Some are, but what's
Mhm.
happening is that more and more of coming out there that are meant, let's get this straight there, that they're created for an innocent reason, but much like anything else, they turn it for evil.
Yes, they do, because they're addicted to the perversion. What's an element of the addiction that's there that you're aware of, Katie? I'm sure you could dive into this all day, but what is the cornerstone of this, do you believe?
I don't know if and we've talked to some of the investigators, like I said, the Garden Retreat, obviously, we're really well connected with a lot of folks that are in this crime type, and we've kinda asked that, and I don't know that you can really pinpoint. I know a lot of people talk about porn and different stuff. I know some people have tried to throw out there, it's the ones that were victimized themselves, they become the person who is victimizing people, and I go back to myself, to other folks who have been victims of child exploitation or sexual abuse. That's a bunch of crock. You don't become a predator because you were preyed on yourself. Why they do it, I don't know. It starts so young. People don't understand, Melissa, that this isn't just like 16 and 17-year-olds. We're not talking like a small age gap. These people are preying on infants. They're
Yes.
downloading images of infants being brutally sexually abused by their caregiver. 'Cause sometimes not the parents, sometimes it is. Maybe it's aunt, uncle. Maybe it's somebody who trusted like you yourself. How many times have you been on those Facebooks, Melissa, in the moms group, and the parents, the kids, women are begging someone to come to their house, they don't care who you
Yes.
are, to watch their child, or "I'm so desperate to get to work, I'll bring them to you." My heart breaks, and I just wanna scream at the screen, "What are you doing? You're taking your most prized possession and putting it in the arms or in someone's house who you don't know because you need to get to work." We need to have something better as a community to help moms and dads, because not just moms, that are single parents who don't have a family resource or network or a close friend network. Again, just because they're friends doesn't mean you're controlling who's coming over.
Yes.
So something that's vetted for these folks because they do have to work. You can hear the desperation. If I don't get to work, I'm not gonna be able to feed that child, Melissa. I'm not gonna be able to
Yes.
put a roof. How am I gonna afford Christmas? They have a birthday coming up and your heart just breaks for them because you know why they're doing it, but you know what's gonna happen to that child.
Yes, I've seen it personally. I've helped plenty of mothers. And you're thinking, if I just show up there, I can protect this child. And I've learned a lot through these experiences. Very heartbreaking. And
We love to think that there's good, but remember in any field, there's good and the bad. I've met a lot of great detectives out there that they're much like us. Like when you come to the Garden Retreat, you'll meet some of these guys, Melissa. They have the
Mhm.
heart. They wish they had more time. They themselves have families. And I don't think enough people think about what they go through. Imagine seeing these images every day, Melissa. These kids
Ugh,
being abused. You don't know who they are. They're
right.
crying in some of these videos. Sounds much like you said, they do. They go after the children who can't speak because once you can speak, you become more of a danger to them being able to tell law enforcement, their parents, what's going on. So they're hearing these kids, they can't even talk yet, crying, screaming, the pain, the anguish in their eyes, and they can't help them. Can you imagine seeing that day in and day out, and there's no help, and you can't talk to anybody, that I think a lot of people think that us as law enforcement, we're supposed to be strong. Well, you can only see so much of this, Melissa. It's going to break you, and those
Yes.
officers who are in this line of work because they were victims themselves, it's bringing back up that unresolved trauma. And
Yes, it
so,
is.
they start spiraling in other ways. They start turning to substance abuse, sometimes suicide, trying to be removed from the unit. Nobody wants to willingly, most times, investigate these cases. There's a lot of pain, anguish, a lot of guilt on your heart. We had some investigators at the last garden retreat ask, what was a turning point? Much like your question, what was a turning point? What happened in one of your investigations that was just kind of a stopper for you? And he was one of our investigators, one of those manly type, joking, just having a good time. And he said, well, we were interviewing a young girl. She was about 9. And she stops the forensic interviewer because they were just in there. You, again, have to have someone specialized to interview. Some are, some aren't. And she turns to them and says, why didn't you find me sooner? And, they're not the first ones to hear that. They won't be the last ones to hear that. This little girl was begging to be found. And the reality is that same agency, Melissa, has not changed their staffing since 2017, but their cases have increased in the thousands. But the same number of investigators, all that they're allotted. Same with technology. As technology is getting better, they try to keep up with that. That's
Yeah.
why we came up with the Guardian Retreat. We have to do something to help these guys stay in the fight longer and give them some tools and techniques to help deal with what they're seeing every day. Yes, do some of these guys have their partners that they can talk to within the unit? Yes. But a lot of these agencies, Melissa, what people don't know is they're a single investigator and their department sees them as the black sheep. Nobody wants to hear what's going on. I heard from a sheriff here in Florida recently, called me up. We were talking about the garden retreats, different stuff that we do there. He's very excited, wants to do some of the aspects of it, like the brain mapping. And he continued on how his wife was a ICAC, so the Internet Crimes Against Children investigator. And he told me that he told her when she'd come home, he didn't want to hear it. And it's not because he didn't care about what she was doing or the cases she was working, is that it would anger him so much that he'd want to go out and hurt those folks that were
Right.
hurting children. So they don't often have even the support at home. And they're lucky both in law enforcement. That's not always the case with law enforcement. As you know, I'm sure you've been around, not everybody who's in law enforcement is married to somebody in law enforcement. So
Yes.
they don't understand necessarily what's happening to their spouse while they're at work. And that's another thing that the Guardian Retreat focuses on. We want to look at helping to build that community for the spouses as well, so that if there's or significant other, they don't have to be married, whoever their support system is, if they were coming home in a bad day, we're not saying that, to just let them take it out on you. We're not saying that at all, but trying to give them tips and tools themselves, somebody to reach out to so they can help maybe calm them down, that, hey, my husband did that, or my wife did this. This is how I handled this. So that they too know that they're not alone in this field, because they're not. And if we can help prevent, say, marriages from breaking down, imagine if you have one of these detectives that's going through a divorce and child custody, how effective and efficient are they going to be on the job trying to save the other children if they're worried about their own home life? So we need
Yes.
to help make sure that all the grounds are stable for all of our children, not just theirs, not just their families, all of the children, all of the communities. And it's a well-rounded approach that we're trying to help make happen. I mean, I know some of the questions in there talks about the mental. It's still a stigma. I know one of your questions is, what's the stigma? It's still mental wellness. Everybody's supposed to be tough and I can handle this. But that's not the case. We're all humans. How much do you think that these people can see day in and day out and the sounds that they hear before somebody breaks? I mean, how long do you think you could handle that, Melissa?
I mean, I know it personally, being a civilian investigator, private investigator in my state, looking at so many different cases every day and not having anyone to share it with. We have a small task force that I lean on. I meet with people, but I carry this mainly by myself, and I'm great at what I do. It gets overwhelming. You almost don't have time to process the wins, and it becomes a lack of balance. And then at the end of the day, that child's still been victimized or they're dead, because I focus on murdered and missing children. And it's something I never thought I would do, but I want to say thank you to you for everything you're doing, but also for covering so many of the bases that are important. What's been on my heart is not only what I could give back to the community, but how can I help law enforcement? What do we need to get in the police department to help them decompress? Do they need saunas? Do they need red light therapy medical grade? Do
We're
we
doing all
need
that.
TBI scans? Because TBI, is it not such a huge factor?
So that brain mapping I was telling you about, that's one of the things. And that one of the ladies that I use, she's there in Colorado. After this, I should put you in touch with Carly because she does, in fact, it's called Brightwave. So they
Mhm.
do all of our brain mapping, and she does a significant discount even to our law enforcement. Like, we've had folks who've come through the Guardian Retreat. It tells whether they're stuck in vigilante stage. Melissa, it tells, whether you're on fight or flight, even with your eyes shut. I mean, the technology and what it can tell you, it's one of the biggest things that we get the biggest reviews back from law enforcement is understanding, like, how did it know that I'm up at 3 a.m.? I mean, that's how detailed these
Wow.
brain maps are. And that's one of the biggest things that we get from them. So I totally enjoy when they come out. They've made it cost efficient for some of our law enforcement because not everything's covered by insurance. So a lot of the things that you're talking about are things that we do. I'm sure you looked into the cold plunge, the sauna.
Yeah.
I laugh, but it's simple stuff, but it's not simple. People forget when you're in law enforcement and you're in that regiment and you have to go to training, you're stuck inside of a building, you're listening for 8 hours. We wanted to do away with that. We wanted it to break those chains to where they're more receptive to the information that we're giving them and that they'll more easily retain it. So we make sure the environment's relaxed with folks they want. I try to make sure when we do these retreats that we have people from all over the not just say Florida. We have people from Colorado, we've had people from Virginia, we've had and state, local, and federal, by the way. We've had some federal people sign up, whether it be FBI, Homeland Security. We try to make sure there's a good mix because I also want those folks as they're learning like these techniques, the breathing techniques, they're bonding, Melissa. They go into the sauna, they've all gone through this horrible cold plunge because it was cold in March, sitting there in the ice 3 times. They got to do it. They're bonding in that sauna. They're coming out. We're breaking down some of those barriers. Some of the most quiet folks, have now opened up and they start to talk to folks. And that's what I want. I want them to have a connection outside their own department because unfortunately, when people need help, whether, like I said, it be drinking, alcohol is drinking, but the drugs, legal or illegal, any kind of thing that might be turning to numb that pain they're feeling, that they have that new brother or sister that they can reach out to. I'm having a hard time, I'm struggling. Because the reality, the mental illness still within the departments is still looked down upon as a
Mhm.
negative, not something people are afraid they actually admit they need help, that they're going to be removed, one from that unit or removed from the force, period. And we need to change that stigma. It's
Yeah.
okay to ask for help. It's
Yes,
okay
it is.
to need it. But you also need to be aware of what's going on around you. And I think, sometimes we're so focused on the cases, we need to take a step back and look at that person who's struggling. I have one particular person that I've worked around him, and other people have reached out, hey, he needs help. We need to make sure he gets into the retreat. Well, I can't make anybody go, but what I can do is definitely move him up to a list when he finally does put in for it, because I can control that and see who's on there to make sure they're getting the help because they're not. And I can see the struggles that are happening. And that's what we need more of. Some of these units have more than one person, and it's looking out for your brother or sister in the fight. Much like we talked about the kids watching their personality changes. Well, what's happening to your brother? Is he not talking to you anymore? Are they extra quiet? Have they shut down? Do you know that they witnessed a tragedy or just found out one of their victims who they couldn't get to in time because the subpoena didn't come back in time is now dead? You
Right.
notice this shift. It's being able to recognize that and reach out and get them the help that they need before sometimes they even ask for it. It's just pointing out to them. Have you ever been in that position where the person didn't realize something was wrong? Like, we had one person who referred to themselves in third person. Like, you would hear them talk about stuff, and we'll use my name as an example because it's easier. Katie doesn't like this. Katie doesn't like that. And the person goes, why do you keep referring to yourself in third person? And then it kind of brings their focus back and they realize what's going on. Well, the same thing. It's being able to pick up. You worked with these people for years. What's happening? Is there something that I need to trigger? Most of these folks will tell you, they have to go through quarterly assessments, especially in this field. Some go monthly, but they're not always honest with the person who's reviewing them, psychiatrists or psychologists, because they're afraid of if they open up, what can happen. And then some do open up, Melissa, and guess what? The person that they brought in to help them doesn't know how to help them because they've never seen or heard such horrible things in their life. And now they're traumatized.
Yes. It is hard to seek therapy when you've been through not only trauma in your own personal life, that is their job. They're going to be re-traumatized over and over again. It's just a fact. When we look at it on a level of humanity, you could be the strongest, most physically strong man in the room, right? You could be the most mentally strong. You could see all these things and go home and cry in private. But there's only so much that the physical body can take mentally and physiologically. Some of my guys, most of my friends and colleagues are retired, and they tell me that they struggle with sleep. Most of them have childhood trauma or an event that made them. And since we're friends, they come to me, they open up to me because they know that I care. And I know what it's like to go to the best therapist that you can find, and you can see it on their face. They cannot understand this is what you've dealt with. It's not like they just hang up their hat and they go home. No, you're constantly on guard, and this is why we're at war, right? We know that all of us are at war every day, whether it be spiritual, whatever your belief system is. We can no longer ignore what we're up against surrounding us. And it's such a shame that we live in a society that even if the average civilian opens up to the wrong person, then it could have a detrimental effect on their family. This is all of our problems. We have to care about each and every one of the people that are a working piece of this. Katie, if the average civilian wants to get involved, they want to do more than just donate, what can they do? How can we get out in these streets daily?
Well, and that leads me to another pet peeve of mine. Let's talk about these vigilantes.
Oh, please, yes.
Don't. I cannot stress this enough. These people think that going on the app and pretending to be a child and meeting up with these folks, not only can you get yourself killed, but you've now made this criminal smarter because there are no law enforcement agencies who are going to take on the quote unquote case that you've built with your evidence. And if they did, there's going to be no DA who's going to take that to court. And all you've done is now given this predator new tips and tools to beat law enforcement because you thought it would be smart to try to catch one and that somebody would be able to help you. They are the greatest risks to these folks getting out and staying out, Melissa, are these folks who think they're helping, but they're not.
Okay.
And the reality, the best thing that these folks can do, whether it's donations to help, because like our donations again go through the Guardian Retreat is something that we pay. It's 100% donor paid. And we did that for a reason. One, we don't ever want an agency to have to say no because they don't have funding. You have a lot of small agencies. That's where we come in with the task force and helping to fund the ICACs is helping with these agencies because they don't have the means. But donations, but getting out there. There's so many other ways of getting out there. And what I mean by that is educating your community on signs, things to look for, the grooming techniques. This is one field, Melissa, that is not just specific to one nonprofit. And we in particular love partnering up with ones that are same mission driven, that they have high integrity, that we know what they're saying they're doing with their money and they're actually doing with their money. Like we pride ourselves on when somebody donates, that money is going to the cause that they said it was going to. Like a particular donor donated to Central Florida. Guess what, Melissa? That money went to Central Florida. We don't take it and put it someplace else. And that's very important. It's my integrity on the line when I'm out there talking to people about fundraising. Encourage anybody before they make a donation anywhere is that they make sure the funds are going where they're supposed to and that they're actually out there helping because there's a lot of agencies. But we also don't reinvent the wheel. I have folks that have one that we're working and talks with right now, Melissa, and I'll send you the link once that's all figured out. That's called Parent ProTech. And what they've done is they've created an app that you can go on the web and it actually puts everything in one spot, Melissa. So it goes in details about Snapchat, about all the games that your kids are on. And it goes through and it tells you like the hidden files, what's really happening, how these people and these predators talk to your kids. School safe sites. They actually have school programming. And there's not enough of that in the schools to teach our kids internet safety. There just isn't. But they have put it together. And I love that because it keeps the parents and the general public out there from searching. I don't have anything against TikTok or Facebook or anything else that you Google or even YouTube. But we have so many people out there who think and are portraying themselves as experts when they're not. And so if you are a parent and the first time out there searching and you just stumble upon this one video and you take that as gospel and you're going off of what they said, it might not be accurate information. So I love that they have put together factual and accurate information in one spot. You as a parent, Melissa, can go on there and say, my kid wants to download Discord. You can go on there and watch the whole video on Discord, the pros, the cons, and what you should be looking out for. And if you choose to have your child on there, the safety tips that they give you to make sure that the experience is one that is pleasant and not one where they're preying on your child. And that, to me, is extremely valuable. It goes back to what I told you before. Want to help keep the people that are in the fight longer. You know this, even on the civilian side, Melissa, it takes time money
Yes.
and energy to train our law enforcement to be able to do these investigations. They're very detailed. People think that this is something that's just happening overnight, Melissa. It's not. It takes years sometimes to put these cases together, the thousands upon thousands of images, data, videos, phones, everything they have to go through. It is not a quick process. And then
Right.
having your prosecutor trust you enough to where they're not having to go through everything as well, that they know that you do a great job and that they can just take this straight to court and know that, they can get a conviction or a plea deal, which isn't always the best, but get a plea deal to get this person off the street. That takes a lot of time and energy, and we need to make sure we're keeping those people. Otherwise, we're starting all over, and it's making that cog in that wheel lag because now we have to start over with training and gaining that support, that trust. So that's one cog, keep them in the fight. The next one is the gap of funding, whether it be you see the amount of what they spend on drugs and what they spend on what we call our ICAC task forces. In case you didn't know, there's 61 internet crimes against children task forces within the US. And each of those guys, we have 3 here in Florida. I believe California has 4. And each of those guys are given a certain amount of money from the DOJ funds every year. And that's supposed to help fund personnel, equipment, training, technology. That's not enough. I mean, the
Right.
amount they get is peanuts when you're looking at how much. I think it was like 30 million went out last year on DOJ. Not sure that it's out there. Think about that. Divided by 61 different agencies. So the amount of funding is nothing compared to what they need. I know because we fund a lot here in Florida. And I
Uh-huh.
know just in one portion, just my North Florida, the commitment's like 1.9 million. And that's for personnel, bringing on officers in certain jurisdictions that never had anybody. I think people are missing that too, Melissa. They don't understand that, there's folks who think they don't have a problem. It's not that you don't have a problem. You just haven't had anybody there to investigate the problem. And we need to be the proactive policing, not the reactive. And when you don't have an investigator that's in your county investigating these, you're like here in Florida, FDLE, so the Florida Department of Law Enforcement will investigate it. Well, they're not necessarily living in that community. By us coming in and giving them the funds to hire investigators specifically for child exploitation, human trafficking, you're putting that person in your community. Guess what? That means that person knows that peeping Tom through the window. So when they start seeing cases, they can start being proactive and not reactive. Like, I got this case, I'm going to go check on this person. They already know their community. They've already been
Uh-huh.
out there. They've been on patrol. We're missing that because people don't have it. So you got that. And then we go back to like the Parent Protect app that I like so much and some of the other
Mhm.
education stuff we have coming out, because then that helps prevent them from being victims. We focus on, yes, putting them away, keeping them in the fight, but how about we also focus on making sure they're not as readily available as people are? And that's goes back to the parents and the community. Remember, it used to take a village to help raise children. We need to go back to that in a
Yes.
sense. And that's people looking out for other people's kids. And you sound like you're a lot like me. How many times have you seen like a child wandering? I remember a kid, we have a huge Halloween event here, and I remember a kid just wandering around. And, you just pick up the kid and, and you take them to where they need to go, trying to find help. Not everybody's like that. Some people just let this small child nonverbal wander the streets. So it's that, but not to the extreme, making sure that the kids, like my husband made a good point. He was going to go use the restroom at a public place. 2 small boys walked in there. And I'm like, why aren't you going to the restroom? He's like, I'm not going in there. There's 2 small kids that just went in there. And you have to like step back and go, you're right. He didn't want to have that perception, even though he would never have done anything, the perception that could have happened by going into the restroom with 2 small kids. And I think we lose track of that sometimes. Same with, some of these gender neutral bathrooms. I make sure if I'm going in there, my child's in there, that, we're in one stall. You got to protect
Yes.
the kids. And it's sad if you look out for them. And, back to the high school. I know your kids homeschooled, and we all, and I go between with our little one. Homeschool, should we allow them? You want to make sure that they are getting to meet kids their own age. But look at
Yes.
all the sextortion that's going on. Look at all the other things that are happening in the schools. Guess what? Your kids' teachers now have free access to your kids. We just talked about some of the predators. They write messages to your kids on their, whatever their school sites are. What do you think's happening there? That hasn't changed. It's not like the teachers all of a sudden grew up and decide they're not going to victimize children anymore. It's making sure our kids know what they're looking out for, knowing that if somebody's asking you this or doing that, It's not appropriate. I know for personal experience with my 18-year-old, she was kind of moody. One of the teachers reached out to me and it's like, what's going on? And I made the mistake of just saying she's struggling. Well, he used that kind of like a door in, not saying he did anything wrong, but you just unwillingly let that person know that your child is ready to be victimized by letting them know that they're struggling somewhere, whether it be mentally, in school, family. You're trying to get them to stay off your child's back, but you unwillingly gave them the key to get closer to your child. And I think we just need to step back sometimes as parents, realize the things that we say, not only just the things that the kids say, can affect our kids and open them up too. These parents who talk to their friends, so and so is doing this, and they're venting to their friends. Well, you don't know who's in the house around them. You don't know who's sitting next to them. When you guys are having these conversations at a restaurant, you're letting strangers or even people you think trust, because you don't know the conversation you had with that so-called friend doesn't leave there. You're letting them know that your child is struggling in some way, and you're letting that vulnerability show. And you know that it's just like a wounded animal. They're looking to strike.
Yes, they are. Yes, they are. And there's so much, Katie. It's just been incredible to graze the surface with you because there's so much that we have to touch on. And I feel like in 1 hour, it's impossible. Especially with somebody of you have so much knowledge, but it also comes from, I sense this from you. You're living your vocation. This is what ultimately I believe in destiny. I know that's what I'm doing. And there's so much I would love to get into with you. Anything I can do to help you. That's
No,
what
I
I'm here.
appreciate it because it's getting out there and people learning. I want, and I say this not jokingly, I want Protecting Children's Innocence Task Force to be a household name, PCI for most part, to be a household name, not people go, who, what? They go, oh yeah, they're the ones who help law enforcement. They help our children. They help us. So that's the goal. And you're right, and we do so much within this organization that, it is a lot to cover between the technology, the help for the officers, and just trying to help the kids. But it takes all those to be well-rounded. So yes, I'm absolutely open for any
Yes.
taking a stand. I end with one more fact for them. Listen, I know you've seen this. A lot of people go, my area is number one in this. I have that conversation with folks all the time. Donors will be like, oh, my area. I want everybody to remember that it goes back to when I told you that agency didn't have anybody, so it didn't look like they were having those crime types. Just remember, if you're in an area where the sheriff's office or the police department's heavily doing human trafficking or child exploitation, it's going to look like it's a massive problem because you have more resources being utilized to combat that issue compared to maybe your next door neighbor. So it doesn't necessarily mean your area is any more exuberant with these pedophiles than, say, next door. It's just you have more time and energy being built on it. And the reality is the whole US looks like that, from human trafficking to child exploitation.
It's true.
You asked that earlier, how do civilians help? It's really hard. Like, I have law enforcement experience, but I don't partake in the chat ops. I do nothing that can jeopardize that. Everybody always says, what can we do? We're not breaking down doors. You're not taking kids. This isn't overseas where you can operate by different laws. Here in the US, we have to do it legally. And unfortunately, that's through law enforcement, whether it be your local agencies. There are AGs or prosecutors that do the cases, Melissa. And that's what's hard because I get people time, hey, I have this resume, but we're not actively investigating. We are trying to find the funds and make sure that the ones who are already trained or need to be trained have the means to do that. I wish we had a way to have more civilians like ourselves in there, but then you're risking the prosecution end because they're looking at
Yes.
that. So, the biggest thing is them spreading the word, like I talked about, is educating people, breaking those chains, Melissa. I think if more people opened up about their own trauma and once they realize that they're not alone, I think that will be a wave too, because some of these parents are seen as overbearing, protective, and really you're just trying to protect your child from going through the pain and hurt and not understanding that trauma that you still carry with yourself, that they don't have to experience that. I think if more people come to understand that trauma and open up, that maybe our children and the things that are happening would make more sense. Like, we're not being overbearing, we're just trying to protect you from being hurt. That they're, and the last thing is we don't want people to be fear-mongered. We want people to still live their lives just with bigger glasses.
Yes. Katie, thank you so much for
Right,
joining
thank
me
you
today
for the
and for
opportunity.
this conversation. I can't wait to dive deeper with you and really we can focus on the solutions.
Yes.
Katie, Thank you for sharing not only your experience, but your perspective on one of the most urgent issues facing our society. Crimes against children are among the most vicious and devastating crimes we face. And the reality is, the fight requires more than arrests and investigations. Crimes against children are among the most vicious and devastating crimes we face. And the reality is, this fight requires more than arrest and investigations. It requires real solutions. It requires stronger partnerships, better training, better technology, community awareness, and a public that is willing to understand what is happening instead of looking away. It also requires us to protect the men and women in law enforcement and investigative roles who carry the weight of these cases every single day. The mental and physical toll of confronting crimes against children cannot be ignored. Supporting their wellness, resilience, and long-term health must become part of the mission. That's why these conversations matter. Relationship building matters. Bringing experts, investigators, advocates, and the public together matters. When we shine light on these difficult realities, we create education, awareness, and momentum for change. Thank you again, Katie, for the work you do and for being part of this important discussion. And thank you to everyone listening to Alternative Eye Beyond the File. Stay aware, stay engaged, and we'll see you next time.